Welcome to Supply Chain Now, the voice of global supply chain. Supply Chain Now focuses on the best in the business for our worldwide audience, the people, the technologies, the best practices, and today's critical issues, the challenges and opportunities. Stay tuned to hear from those making global business happen right here on Supply Chain Now.
So good afternoon. This is Kevin L. Jackson presenting Digital Transformers from the Supply Chain Now studio just outside of Washington, D.C. With me today is the esteemed owner and editor of Buyer's Meeting Point and host of Dial P for Procurement, Kelly Barner. How are you doing, Kelly?
Good, Kevin L. Jackson with your show voice. I'm so pleased to be with you today. Thank you for inviting me on as guest co-host.
Oh no, I needed you. I needed you. So because today we have a really unique show planned for the audience. We'll be discussing supply chain dynamics from both the buyer and supplier sides. That's actually why I shanghaied you to co-host with me today, bringing all your audience.
Oh, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
So I'm looking forward to you exhibiting your procurement expertise throughout this conversation. And we have two supplier side experts from Trust Your Supplier. We have April Harrison that leads marketing, and the TYS general manager, Gary Storr. It sounds like we're going to have a title fight. Kelly, can you handle the competition?
I think there may actually be some surprises in store today. I think maybe somewhere along the way during all the drama of 2020, maybe procurement became a little less adversarial than we're known for being. So I think this is going to be a really interesting exchange.
Oh, great. So we'll have them introduce themselves shortly. But first, I want to thank our sponsor, Digital Names by Total Network Services. If you enjoy today's conversation, be sure to find and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast, okay? So with no further delay, let's bring in our supplier side heavyweights from Trust Your Supplier. And before I go on much further, I probably should disclose that I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Source Connect, a proud Trust Your Supplier partner. So please introduce yourselves and tell us about TYS and your roles there.
Well, Kevin, thanks so much. We really appreciate you taking the time and giving us the opportunity to be part of this show. And we've been, we mentioned this to you off air. We've been excited about doing this for weeks. So my name is Gary Storr. As Kevin mentioned, I'm the general manager of Trust Your Supplier. To Kelly's point, I'll be the first one to tell you I'm not a big fan of titles, but that's what they call me. They call me a lot of other things too, but those I probably shouldn't share. I have overall responsibility for Trust Your Supplier, which we're going to talk about a lot here today, and we're looking forward to it. And with me here, unfortunately, her video is not operating correctly today. We've got a little bit of computer malfunction. But April Harrison, maybe you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm April Harrison. I'm the marketing director for Trust Your Supplier, and I'm coming to you from my home office in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And yes, as Gary mentioned, I do not serve a technical role, so hence I'm the one having the computer problems, but glad to be here with you today.
Yeah, no problem. We're glad to have you with us. So to start off with, I don't know how many people have actually heard of Trust Your Supplier and what you do. So could you describe what Trust Your Supplier is? What's the ecosystem and its members?
Sure, Kevin. Well, first of all, I can tell you how many people have heard of Trust Your Supplier, and that's not enough. So we love getting the word out, and so this gives us an opportunity to share, our vision and our product and how we think we're bringing to the world of procurement something that's transformational, right? So Trust Your Supplier, it's a trusted platform, and people ask, what does Trust Your Supplier provide? Trust Your Supplier provides trust. And trust is really important in our world, as we all know today more than ever. With our experiences over the last year, we've learned that trust is an imperative in procurement and with our partnerships. And so we recognize this, and Trust Your Supplier is a journey that's about 4 years old now. And so what we've developed is a set of technology that allows suppliers to create a trusted identity on a blockchain platform using this latest technology in blockchain. and allows that identity then to be consumed by procurement organizations. These are typically large enterprises that have vast procurement organizations, and they can consume this digital profile that a supplier is creating, and immediately make decisions about onboarding, make decisions about qualification, make decisions about how they want to partner with this particular supplier, or if they do want to partner with that supplier, and then ultimately manage the life cycle, the relationship over time with that supplier using this tool and this service. So Trust Your Supplier is currently deployed in North America, Europe, some parts of Eastern Asia, and in South America. We're growing to other areas in the world as we speak. We're currently in 70 countries. We support 7 languages. We've got on a network now 30 plus Fortune 50 organizations that are actively participating on the network, and over 10,000 members, participants from a supplier perspective. So it's an exciting time of growth, but we're not there yet. And we look forward to having organizations like Kevin's and others be part of Trust Your Supplier.
Wow, that's amazing. But April, how do you market trust?
Well, I think after this past year, we all have a new appreciation for an efficient and secure supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
So speed and risk mitigation I think more of the public has become aware of those things as we've seen empty shelves at the store and things. So I think that using a combination of showing how efficiency and the blockchain technology addresses some of these issues is really where trust comes into play. So our network is built on trust. We have trust anchors, the buyers that invite their suppliers. And then also, once it's in there, everything's written on blockchain, and there's standardization across the industries. So things are secure, but they can also happen faster. So suppliers enter their information once, and then it goes to all their TYS connections instead of having to do it multiple times. And then the data gets old, so they can update it, and automatically any update to that profile gets sent to the buyer. So it's fast and it's secure.
Wow, this sounds like heresy. So Kelly, do you think buyers could actually trust suppliers?
I do actually. And it's amazing because one of the things we have definitely learned through the last year is that even in the most challenging spend categories, procurement does not have a supplier problem. We have a supplier data problem, right? That's an issue for us. It's an issue in terms of onboarding new suppliers and trying to gather a foundation of information that, let's face it, suppliers have entered 1 million times into 1 million different databases, right? So there's no value add to that. We have a challenge around getting that data right the first time and then actually keeping it up to date ongoing. But there's one other piece of this that really kind of appeals to me with the trends that I see in procurement. And the one big trend is self-guided buying. So in the past, I know procurement has a bad reputation. We say, this is our territory. You're not going to source. You're not going to contract. This is what we do. But now we're recognizing that with the amount of spend and the number of contracts, if we can get trusted information out to certain points in the enterprise, we can say, listen, within certain guidelines, using these trusted information resources, you can actually go and make some of these decisions and evaluate some solutions yourself. But we can't do that if we don't solve the supplier data problem first. And all of the relationships that a company has with its supply base are going to start there and work outward.
Wow, that's really a great observation. But one thing I want to sort of go back on, both April and Gary, you both highlighted blockchain in your description of what you do. This is a blockchain platform. Many of our audience may not understand what that actually means. So why is that so important?
Well, blockchain is a decentralized database structure that allows information to be stored in a fashion such that it can be distributed over a broad network. And that means that ownership of that information can be distributed as well. So if you want to think about a network like ours, where we have constituents that are buyers, suppliers, and authoritative third-party sources of information. These are third parties or people like Dun & Bradstreet or Rapid Ratings, EcoVadis, people like that provide commentary and expert ratings on suppliers to help augment that trust equation. Well, that information is stored on a secure blockchain, but it's not owned by anybody. It's owned by everybody. And within blockchain, nodes can be established such that individual organizations can own nodes on the network. This ownership allows them to have a secure platform that mitigates things like collusion, hacking, and other elements of, that we all read about in the paper every day that lead to breaches of core information, personal information, natural PII. And so we wanted to build this platform on something that was trusted. And in today's world, from a technical perspective, there is no safer, more constrained architecture from a security perspective than blockchain. And another key element of blockchain, I talked about, we sell trust. That trust is embedded in an identity of the supplier. So when a supplier creates that profile I talked about, they're really creating an identity. This is who they are. They enter it one time. They can distribute it many times as that single version of the truth. And there's other networks in the world today and in the future that are going to be looking or are looking for the identity of an organization. And we can provide that identity. So other networks, other blockchain networks can plug into this blockchain network and consume that digital identity and use it for other purposes, whether that could be, a financial application, perhaps that has something to do with product provenance. It could have to do with logistics and shipping. It could have to do with other elements of data rights and security. But that identity is an extremely important element as we moved into this digital world.
Gary, if you don't mind, if I can ask you kind of a follow-up question to that. It sounds like there's a broad range of business applications for Trust Your Supplier. And when you were talking about the trust that's established through the blockchain management of data, you basically made a comment that you can work well with everybody. Now, traditionally, solutions tend to be either buy side or supply side. Can you talk about either how you've evolved beyond that, or maybe how you would typically characterize where Trust Your Supplier sits in the supply chain?
Well, I'll answer the second question first. So it sits in the very front of the supply chain. In fact, I refer to it as the front door. So when a supplier relationship is established, it's established with that digital identity. So in front of the supply chain, we are capturing that information that can be then routed through the architecture, through the back office of any business enterprise. That digital identity moved into the ERP, which leads me to the answer to the other part of your question, and that's historically organizations have established ERPs inside their own enterprise. They talked well inside the enterprise, but they don't talk very well outside the enterprise. And that's a pain point that we wanted to resolve, we wanted to address. We wanted to create that decentralized network so that supplier information could be distributed in this decentralized way to any enterprise in the world. So if you're a member of Trust Your Supplier, you're actually sitting on a network. You're sitting on a network like you're sitting on a network in LinkedIn, or sitting in a network if you're on Facebook or any of these. And so that information can be shared. And because that information can be shared transparently and architecturally, it's agnostic to the back office solutions that are within the individual enterprise. That information then can be easily shared across industries and across the globe. And that was a very important part of our architectures, to be open and to be able to be consumable by all different types of ERP architectures that exist in today's enterprise.
So it's clearly a very unique solution, both in terms of its breadth and in terms of the approach that you take to the business challenges that you see. Would you talk in terms of value proposition with all of the different stakeholders that you might work with in your ecosystem, whether on the buy side or the supply side? How do you communicate that value, or what do you seem to hear back from folks that makes Trust Your Supplier most valuable to them?
Well, on the supplier side, there's really two value props. Number one, you mentioned it earlier, actually, is suppliers do the same thing over and over and over again traditionally. Everybody sends them a spreadsheet. Here, fill this out. Right. And then, 3
Guilty.
days and 3 days and 400 cups of coffee later, right? They have it complete.
Yes.
And they send it over, and invariably there's things missing. And this goes back and forth. And what it does is it drives cycle time and administrative burden on both sides of the aisle, on the procurement side and on the supplier side. And the supplier has to do this with every single customer. So what we've done is we've created a platform where you do that one time, and then you can just distribute it. Just like I'll use a LinkedIn paradigm again. You create your LinkedIn profile one time, you can send it to anybody. You can connect with anybody. Our network works much the same way. The other value proposition for the supplier is, and I know Kevin's excited about this, is it creates an opportunity for new business, because now you become digitally discovered with a trusted identity. I know as a buyer, as a procurement professional, if you are sitting on the Trust Your Supplier network, that you are a trusted entity. I still have to go through my vetting and my due diligence, but I know that you are there because you're trusted by another organization. And so thereby, that puts you in good stead to be qualified and onboarded. So that creates an opportunity for new business. And what does every supplier in the world wants? They want more customers, right? So we give them a chance to find new customers. That's a very big, that's been true since, the beginning of time. And then on the procurement side, the value proposition is we reduce the cycle time. If we reduce the cycle time, we reduce the cost. If we reduce the cost, we reduce the administrative burden. If we and we take away some of the risk associated with missing information, human error, fraud, counterfeiting. We bring in these authoritative sources I talked about to validate and vet the information, so that you can look on one screen and see, this is what the supplier provided me. This is what my third party provided me. Let's say it's Dun & Bradstreet. And I can do a stare and compare. And I say, okay, the supplier's telling the truth. They're validated by an authoritative source. Or maybe they're not. Maybe they have some adverse media that's coming in through our AI engine that's part of our solution. And it talks about some nefarious acts that have been going on, maybe with some corporate officers that would change the way I have a relationship with a partner or supplier. So these are all the things we think, all the value propositions, and there are more, but those are some keys that we think our customers, both suppliers and procurement professionals, are enjoying as part of being part of the platform.
Wow, go ahead, April.
Yeah, Gary. Yeah, so talking about efficiency, that also applies to procurement as well, because now they have a single application that has an aggregated supplier data set that they can go to, instead of going into separate systems to look up information to vet or qualify their suppliers. And this integrated third-party information also allows them to conduct market analysis prior to even starting the administrative task of onboarding. So if they notice right away that there's some, whether it's Rapid Ratings or Dun & Bradstreet or EcoVadis, there's something there that a score that they don't like, they don't even have to go and do all the other administrative work. They simply move on to discover another supplier. If they do like it, then they can go ahead and proceed with their onboarding.
Wow. So it seems like it can really save a lot of effort and a lot of work. But one thing I'm really curious is, over the past year, we've seen a lot of changes with respect to the supply chain and the relationship between the buyers, suppliers, and the end consumers like me. I mean, I'm still afraid to get too low on toilet paper. But, but what lessons have you learned over the past year about the supply chain when it's stressed? And how does your network work in these situations?
Well, anytime the supply chain is stressed, and we've seen that in spades over the course of this pandemic. And we've seen it in the last several weeks with that situation in the Suez Canal.
The Suez Canal,
right?
Yeah.
So it sounds so basic, but it's so easy to stress the world supply chain. Something as simple as a tanker stuck, or a paint factory that was knocked out by a tsunami in Japan a couple of years ago. Not to mention what we've all just experienced with all the uncertainty over the course of the last year. And I'll give you a great use case. So last year, we all know that you speak about toilet paper, but we were all desperately trying to find a mask, right? In those
Yes.
days, masks were not on the shelf at your local supermarket, right? You couldn't find them. And so this was a pervasive issue across the world. And so healthcare providers and some of the large enterprises that were part of our network came to us and said, look, can you help us find trusted suppliers of PPE material, masks, gloves, ventilators? And there was a tremendous amount of fraud going on with procurement of this kind of material. And so we actually stood up a standalone version of Trust Your Supplier. We called it Rapid, and Rapid was intended to address the procurement of PPE and other goods and services related to the pandemic effort in mid-year last year. And so we tried to help organizations find reputable sources of PPE, of masks. And so, we there was a number of hospitals and healthcare organizations that were part of the discussion, and we had a lot of providers come to us and say, look, we've got PPE, and we went through the steps to validate and verify that they indeed did. And quite honestly, in most cases, they didn't. So we had to actually turn away quite a few potential suppliers because we just didn't feel like they were providing a credible source of
they weren't trusted
those materials. So yeah, so that's an example. And we all live this every day, and I think we're going to live this going forward. And we hope that the lessons learned here is that what we really need to do is we really need to be dynamic in terms of how we're procuring suppliers. We all know there's a chip shortage in the world today, right? And so if I'm an automotive manufacturer, if I'm a computer manufacturer, anyone that consumes a lot of silicon, right, and supplier A can no longer provide me, I need to pivot immediately to go to supplier B to source my material. Otherwise, I can't build my product, I can't sell my product. So it's really important to have trusted suppliers at the ready and to have tools available so that if you don't have that trusted supplier available to you, you can find them and onboard them and engage with them very quickly to partner with them in the materials and the goods and services that you need.
So obviously you guys have done a ton of very necessary problem solving over the last year to work through some of these situations. And if I can score some free tips for procurement, I'm curious what recommendations you would have for us. If you think about the lessons that you've learned just by working with these companies on both the buy and supply sides for the last year, what do you think are the takeaways that are going to structurally affect how we continue to source and buy going forward? So some of these issues, hopefully, right, we're never going to have major concerns about PPE again. Hopefully this was a one-time shot to the toilet paper supply chain, but there are still lessons that apply across industries, across maturity levels, company sizes, categories of spend. What would you say are the structural lessons learned that you and your team took from last year that companies should very broadly think about incorporating into either the way they handle supplier discovery generally going forward or the way that they manage supplier data?
That's a great question. I think we've all learned a lot. And I think that what procurement organizations have really learned is that trust is important, that they need to know that when they place an order, that order will be fulfilled. That they know that when they have a critical circumstance, that they have organizations that are going to work with them, right, to help them with their business. If we think about the world today, it's really about partnerships. There's very few organizations that can do things independently. Everyone is leveraged among their partners, and so having that trust with their partner, and I keep using the word trust because it's so important. Having that trust that your partner is going to be part of your machine. To deliver your product, to help you sell, to help you deliver. And I think that was never more evident in the last year that we found that COVID hit and everyone had to take extreme measures. They shut down their office buildings. They had to curtail their manufacturing. There was a lot of uncertainty. We didn't know how to react as a society, as a community. The suppliers that stood by their teams, right? Their customers. Those were the ones that you want there with you, right? So I think that was a big learning. I think the other learning that these organizations had is, look, we have so much dependency on what our suppliers deliver. right?
Oh, yeah.
And without them, we are not able to execute our business. So we better be sure we have the right information, we have the right suppliers in our portfolio, that we understand how to reach out to them in a time of emergency and crisis, and that we understand how to make them, feel responsive, right? And part of our organization's capability to deliver, right? So I think all of those things were extremely important. I know April works with suppliers every day, and I know there's lessons learned there that she learns. She hosts webinars and many other focus groups. And April, you probably have some thoughts as well.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to mention besides the pandemic is we also saw an increase in the demand for diverse suppliers. And so
Okay.
we have many ways that you can filter for suppliers when you're discovering new suppliers. And one of those is diversity. So again, with the trust, they have to upload certificates and things like that. They can't just say that they're a diverse supplier. So that is a new feature that I think would bring lots of advantages to procurement teams as well. And for suppliers, I'll say I think Gary kind of mentioned this earlier, but that discovering new business is extremely important to them, and then also the speed of the process. So I think right now there's a lot of back and forth in the traditional process of I've submitted my paperwork, I'm waiting to hear back. They have questions on these questions and so on and so forth. It can take a long time.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing is with the standardization of our questionnaires and the fact that they can just fill it out once and it goes to multiple procurement teams, there might be a little bit of back and forth, but it's all contained, and it's just anything to speed up that time to the first transaction is really what they're looking for.
Well, you guys have been so good in terms of giving us advice and sharing lessons learned. And those are the things that, whether we're suppliers or procurement listening to this, we can prepare to take advantage of next. Maybe for my last set of questions, April, let me start with you, and then I'll come back to Gary for the same. What would you say is next for your team? What are you working towards next in terms of an offering? What sorts of topic areas are you focusing on? April, you mentioned supplier diversity. That's certainly been a huge and ascendant topic within procurement and supply chain. What's in the future for Trust Your Supplier?
So one thing, as you mentioned, is diversity. So we are looking to bring on different groups of diverse suppliers to the network. Another thing that we're working on is an offer for our suppliers to also become buyers on the network, because they can find value there as well.
Yes.
The suppliers have their own suppliers. And
Right.
so I think that the value is so great in terms of having that single aggregated supplier data, and then also that market analysis ability with the third parties, that they would find it valuable as well.
There's a codependency there that really needs to be serviced. Gary?
Well, I think that if you think about the future, right, you think about how the supply chain is going to evolve and change, right? And so, we mentioned before, the organizations are highly dependent on their ERP structures, but that's still going to start to change as we drive decentralization and interdependency globally, right? We're already starting to see that in the world of logistics. Technologies like blockchain, AI, certainly IoT, this is going to drive further decentralization of the supply chain. You're going to know at any given time where a particular product is in the delivery cycle. Much like we can look at our FedEx package where it's being delivered. You're going to have an IoT device connected to a blockchain network. It's going to tell you where a container is. Anywhere from the time a product is packaged to the time it hits the consumer's front door or loading dock of the business. All of those things are going to change the way the supply chain operates, and it's going to further digitize the interoperability amongst organizations, and it's going to bring suppliers and buyers very closer together. Their information is going to be shared. There's going to be a community of data that we're going to be managing as we start to manage our supply chains. Right, our supply chains will no longer be individual and esoteric. They're going to be a community supply chain, and I think tools like ours, it's a tip of the iceberg. And I talked about identity before, and I think as things like identity start to proliferate to drive some of these core changes and transformations that you'll see in the supply chain, not just the identity of an organization, but the identity of a product. Where did it come from? How was it sourced? Did it use slave labor for raw materials? Right. Wow. That's an extremely important issue in today's world. And so I think you're going to see some of the social fabric of what's happening in the world seep into the supply chain. It's already happening. And I think you're going to start to see technology take a broader role here in terms of how it looks across industries instead of within industries to solve some of those supply chain challenges.
Wow. It sounds like technology like yours, providing this trusted network, is really delivering visibility into the supply chain. And that's huge. Technology is really providing real value in many different ways. So thanks a lot for that, April and Gary. How can companies learn more or get in touch with you to find out more about TYS? Maybe they want to join,
Well, we hope they do, but that's right up April's alley. Go ahead. April.
That's right. Yeah. So I would say first stop would be to visit our website. It's trustyoursupplier.com. Nice and simple. Mm-hmm. There's lots of good resources on there, videos, use cases, those kinds of things. There's also a contact us button that they can hit. And they can also reach out to us at info@trustyoursupplier.com. So that's info@trustyoursupplier.com.
Great. So thank you very much. And on that note, be sure to check out a wide variety of industry thought leadership at supplychainnow.com. You can find us and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. So on behalf of the entire team here at Supply Chain Now, this is Kevin L. Jackson and Kelly Barner wishing all of our listeners a bright and transformational future. We'll see you next time on Digital Transformers. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for being a part of our Supply Chain Now community. Check out all of our programming at supplychainnow.com and make sure you subscribe to Supply Chain Now anywhere you listen to podcasts. And follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. See you next time on Supply Chain Now.